I chose my dad's funeral over work, but I never expected my entire department to stand against the company for me. Hey Reddit, before we start, I just want to say that this is our new channel, and we're working really hard to bring you the best stories. So make sure to subscribe and support us. Let's start the story. I had been working at my company for almost 5 years, putting in countless hours, sacrificing weekends, and pushing myself beyond exhaustion just to climb the corporate ladder. My boss, Mr. Randall, was one of those old-school, numbers-driven managers who believed that loyalty to a company meant prioritizing it over everything else. Family, health, even personal tragedies. I had seen people get overlooked for promotions just because they dared to take a vacation or call in sick. It didn't matter how much you gave to the company. It was never enough. But I never imagined I would become the next example of how little they valued us as human beings. A month ago, my father passed away unexpectedly. He had always been my rock, the kind of man who worked hard every single day just to provide for his family. Losing him felt like losing a part of myself. It wasn't just grief, it was this hollow, aching emptiness that no words could fix. And yet, amidst that pain, I knew I had to be the strong one. My mother was barely holding it together, my siblings looked to me for guidance, and the weight of handling funeral arrangements fell on my shoulders. There was no question in my mind. I needed to be there for my family. So, I sent a formal email to my boss, informing him that I needed a week off. I didn't ask for permission, I informed him, because this wasn't optional. His response came within minutes. We're extremely short-staffed. I strongly advise against taking leave at this critical time. No condolences, no humanity, just a cold reminder that, in his eyes, I was nothing more than a cog in the machine. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling with frustration. This was my father's funeral, not a vacation. I took a deep breath, pushed aside the anger, and typed back a response, stating that I was sorry, but I had to be there for my family. His next email was even colder. Then you're making a choice, and I hope you understand the consequences. I didn't bother replying. I shut my laptop, packed my bags, and left. The next few days were a whirlwind of grief, funeral arrangements, and trying to be the pillar of strength my family needed. I barely had time to process my own emotions because I was too busy making sure everything went smoothly. But in the back of my mind, a small part of me knew I was walking into a storm when I returned to work. I had made my choice, and I was ready to accept whatever happened. Or so I thought. The moment I stepped into the office after the funeral, I felt it. The tension. Conversation stopped as I walked by, and my co-workers exchanged glances. There was something in their eyes, sympathy, yes, but also something else. Something like expectation. I ignored it and went straight to my desk, trying to mentally prepare myself for whatever Randall had in store for me. Then, I saw the email waiting in my inbox. My heart pounded as I clicked on it, already knowing what it would say. It was a termination letter. A cold, formal document stating that my employment was being terminated due to unauthorized absence. I stared at the words, my blood running cold. Unauthorized absence. I had informed them exactly why I needed to leave. I had given them notice. I had explained everything. And yet, here it was, a brutal reminder that to them, my personal loss meant nothing. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my emotions in check, when suddenly, I heard someone clear their throat behind me. I turned around to see my closest coworker, Daniel, standing there. His expression was unreadable, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes. They fired you, didn't they? He asked, his voice low. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Daniel sighed, shaking his head. We all saw the email, he said. Randall didn't even try to hide it. At that moment, I noticed something else. The office was unusually quiet. People weren't talking, weren't working. They were just watching me. Then, before I could even process what was happening, Daniel walked over to his desk, grabbed a piece of paper, and marched straight to Randall's office. He knocked once before pushing the door open and tossing the paper onto the desk. My resignation, Daniel said firmly. I won't work for a company that punishes someone for grieving their father. Randall barely had time to react before Lisa, another coworker, did the same thing. Then another, and another. I watched in utter shock as half the department walked up to that office, handing in their resignations without hesitation. These weren't just random employees. These were people who had been with the company for years, people who had dedicated their time and energy to making this place run. And they were all walking away. Randall's face turned redder with every resignation. His hands were shaking as he tried to argue, to threaten, to convince them to stay, but no one listened. The weight of what was happening finally hit me. They weren't just resigning. They were choosing me over the company. I stood there, overwhelmed, as my coworkers, no, my friends, gathered around me, offering words of support, telling me that no job was worth this kind of heartlessness. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us, about how we were treated like disposable parts instead of human beings with lives and families. Randall, for all his bravado, was completely powerless. By the end of the day, so many people had resigned that the department was crippled. The company had tried to make an example out of me. Instead, they had created a mutiny. But the biggest shock came the next morning. The next morning, my phone buzzed relentlessly. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just the usual flood of notifications. But when it didn't stop, I finally picked it up and saw dozens of messages from my former coworkers. Some were updating me on the chaos unfolding at the office. Others were simply words of support. But one message, in particular, stood out. It was from Lisa. Randall's in full panic mode. HR just called an emergency meeting. They weren't expecting half the department to walk out. I sat up, processing what I had just read. Half the department had quit in protest, and now the company was scrambling to contain the fallout. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, but mostly, I just felt exhausted. I had spent years giving everything to that job, only to be tossed aside the moment I needed a little compassion. But the fact that my coworkers had stood up for me, that meant everything. An hour later, Daniel called me. His voice was practically buzzing with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "The CEO got involved." That caught my attention. "Wait, what?" "Yeah," Daniel continued. "Apparently, news about what happened spread like wildfire. Clients started asking questions when they heard that key employees were gone. And guess what? Some of them threatened to pull their contracts unless the company made things right." I was stunned. I had expected Randall to suffer some blowback, but this was on another level. "That's not even the best part," Daniel added, almost laughing. "Randall just got fired." My breath hitched. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," he said. "The CEO personally came down to the office, tore into him, and fired him on the spot. HR is now begging people to come back. And you're not going to believe this, but they want to rehire you." I blinked, struggling to process everything. Randall was gone. The company was scrambling. And now, they wanted me back? Daniel must have sensed my hesitation because he continued, "Look, man, I know it's tempting. They're probably going to throw a huge salary at you just to fix the mess they made. But after everything they put you through, do you really want to go back?" I didn't even need to think about it. "No, not a chance." Daniel laughed. "Good. I figured you'd say that." I thanked him for everything. Him, Lisa, and all the others who had stood by me. They hadn't just walked out of their jobs. They had stood up for something bigger. And because of that, real change had happened. A few days later, I got a formal email from HR, apologizing for the misunderstanding and offering me my job back with a pay raise. I didn't even bother replying. Instead, I forwarded the email to Daniel and Lisa with a single message. Guess they finally learned their lesson. I moved on, finding a better job with a company that actually valued its employees. As for my old workplace, they spent months trying to recover from the mass resignations and the bad press. But as far as I was concerned, that was no longer my problem. I had lost my father, but in the process, I had found something invaluable. The realization that no job, no paycheck, was worth sacrificing my self-respect. And thanks to my coworkers, I didn't have to learn that lesson alone.